Philippines, please welcome Eala!
500,000 people, one single website.
Find where the players are from and what the actual fan base is here, because there's massive Filipino audience. Keep that in mind next time you make the schedule.
And one catastrophic server crash. On April 22nd, 2026, the organizers of Roland Garros opened their last-minute ticket portal.
I love the Filipino fans too, and I feel a little bit adopted when I play doubles with her.
And what happened next completely blindsided the traditional tennis establishment. Nearly 500,000 frantic fans descended on the platform simultaneously, completely collapsing the official French Open servers within a matter of seconds. On social media, desperate fans instantly compared the digital carnage to the infamous Taylor Swift era's Tour Ticketmaster disaster, and all of this chaos unfolded before Alex Eala had even struck a single competitive ball in Paris. By the time the digital dust finally settled, VIP box seats on secondary markets were listing for a staggering $2,000 for early opening round sessions. Not the finals, not the semifinals, but round one. And the young woman at the absolute center of this unprecedented financial detonation was still, in her own words, trying to convince herself that any of it was actually real. Here is what makes this specific year completely different from every single season that came before it, because Alex Eala arrives at Roland Garros 2026 as a seeded player for the very first time in her professional career at a Grand Slam tournament. This is not some minor footnote in a sports program. Seeding is the institution's formal, ultimate acknowledgement that a player genuinely belongs among the absolute elite of the sport, signaling that her ranking demands structural protection in the competitive draw. Furthermore, this particular venue holds an immense personal weight for her that goes vastly beyond standard ranking points, because back in 2021, Eala won the Roland Garros junior doubles title on these exact historic grounds, meaning she first conquered the city of Paris as a teenager. Now she returns as a dangerous seeded professional, and 500,000 people literally tried to break the internet just to watch her play. The high-stakes match she is walking into on Sunday, May 24th is against Eala Effect, the world number 17 and a genuine teenage prodigy who captured global headlines by reaching the Australian Open quarterfinals in January 26, making her the youngest American player to achieve that feat since Venus Williams back in 1998. This is absolutely not a routine walkover. This is an opening round match carrying the intense, suffocating energy of a Grand Slam quarterfinal, and the ticket resale market figured that out long before the official draw was even announced to the public. The traditional ticketing system was simply never built to handle what Alex Eala represents. Roland Garros historically relies on a strict lottery ticketing structure that by design turns away 90 to 95% of the fans who register. That massive failure rate was considered tolerable when public demand arrived in predictable, manageable waves tied directly to tournament seedings and draw schedules. It is entirely intolerable now because the overwhelming demand for Eala does not wait for the draw, it does not wait for a specific court assignment, and it certainly does not wait for a match schedule. It arrived in full force on April 22nd, weeks before the tournament even commenced, crashing the infrastructure before a single seed was placed in the bracket. The 30-minute browsing limit that Roland Garros desperately implemented as an emergency damage control measure, the 15-minute cart countdown, and the endless cascade of fans violently expelled from the digital queue before they could complete a purchase are not minor inconveniences. They are the documented, undeniable evidence of an elite institution scrambling to manage a cultural phenomenon it never anticipated, watching a player ranked number 38 in the world generate the kind of digital crush that typically belongs exclusively to a Grand Slam final. And when the official sales channels failed, the secondary market responded with ruthless financial efficiency. VIP box seats for the premier Kshatriya sessions during the tournament are reportedly listing from $1,500, rapidly climbing past $2,000 for the specific sessions where Eala is scheduled to appear. These are prices that on the secondary market have historically belonged strictly to quarterfinals week, not the opening days of the tournament. The people profiting from this massive gap are not the tournament organizers, and they are certainly not Eala herself, but rather the sharp brokers who recognized her immense commercial gravity long before the institution did. This court assignment question is not a theoretical debate either, because at the 2026 Australian Open, just 4 months ago, the New York Times and The Athletic ran a highly specific piece questioning whether Grand Slams desperately need to rethink how they assign show courts, pointing directly at the intense tension between Eala's ranking and the massive overflowing crowd she commanded on Court 6. Roland Garros has not publicly resolved that structural question for the 2026 edition, but 2 days before the first competitive ball was struck, on May 22nd, passionate fans were already completely flooding Court 4 just to watch her practice. Not to see a live match, but simply to watch her practice. That historic crash on April 22nd, 2026, where 500,000 people hit refresh at the exact same cosmic moment, is a verified, documented number, officially confirmed by Roland Garros' own institutional Instagram, and widely reported by major outlets like The Big Lead and MSN Sports. The comparison to the Taylor Swift ticket crisis did not originate from a sensationalist tabloid. It came directly from sports fans who had lived through both stressful events and instantly recognized the identical pattern of overwhelming consumer demand. When was the last time a first-round women's singles match generated a digital siege of that terrifying scale? The honest, historical answer is that it has never happened in the recorded history of professional tennis until right now. The crash was not the result of exceptional center court seating placement or a defending champion halo, because Eala was not yet even confirmed to play on Philippe Chatrier, court assignments had not been released, and the draw had not been made public. The public demand was entirely unconditional, as 500,000 people came for her specifically, without needing to know any of the logistical details first. Then look at the practice crowd on May 22nd, 2026, the Monday of tournament week, and 2 days before her opening match on Court 4. This was not a main show court, not a stadium with 50 television cameras pointed at it, but rather a humble auxiliary court, yet the ABS-CBN sports desk ran it as a massive standalone headline reporting that fans flocked in droves to Eala's Roland Garros practice session. Nobody buys an expensive flight to Paris just for a warm-up rally, and nobody stands 3 rows deep at an auxiliary court in the morning heat just to watch a player hit routine ground strokes at 70% capacity, except for her. You have to put yourself directly in the position of the player on the other side of the net during that intense practice session. You are a professional training partner or a hitting partner simply doing your daily job, and suddenly the gallery behind the fence is completely packed to the brim. Not for you, and not for an official match, but for a 20-year-old Filipina in the middle of a standard warm-up routine. That is no longer just a fan club. That is absolute cultural gravity. Her own peers are witnessing it, including Amanda Anisimova in Dubai earlier in 2026. This is exactly where the story stops being a mere numbers argument and becomes something far harder for critics to dismiss. During Eala's match in Dubai earlier this year, Amanda Anisimova, who happens to be seeded number 6 at this very French Open and is an established top 10 player with enough of her own match preparation demands to fill every available hour, chose to voluntarily sit in the stands and watch. It was not for scouting purposes, and it was not because she was scheduled to play the winner, but she stayed because, in her own direct words, she stuck around for it because the atmosphere was just so incredibly great. Anisimova went even further, unprompted by any journalist, calling Eala such a good representation of her country, and adding that she is so young yet carries herself so beautifully. No reporter asked Anisimova to evaluate Eala's national or cultural significance. She offered it entirely on her own. When a current top 10 player voluntarily becomes an audience member at your match, and then volunteers a glowing character assessment that nobody asked for, your cultural footprint has crossed a definitive threshold that rankings alone can no longer measure. This pattern is consistent tournament by tournament and is absolutely not a localized Roland Garros anomaly. The record is clear across every single event Eala has entered in 2026. In Auckland, the massive crowds came out in droves. At the Australian Open, Court 6 completely overflowed, prompting the New York Times to write an extensive piece about the phenomenon. Abu Dhabi, Doha, and Dubai all saw documented, massive fan surges. At Indian Wells, ABS-CBN officially named it the Eala Effect in a dedicated video segment that rapidly accumulated over 40,000 views. Even at Stuttgart's prestigious Porsche Grand Prix, traditional attendance patterns shifted dramatically following her entry into the main draw. Every single venue, every distinct playing surface, and every single time zone yields the exact same result. This pattern across the last 11 months is not a series of happy coincidences. It is a consistent, powerful directional force that has been building since the absolute start of this year and has now reached its loudest, most undeniable expression on the red clay of Paris. For those of you who have been in these stands physically or digitally since long before the mainstream media took notice, you already knew this moment was coming. While massive television networks were still casually deciding where to position their cameras, you were already locked in and watching the journey unfold. The broader sporting world is only now frantically catching up to what you clearly understood months ago, recognizing that this level of global attention is not artificially manufactured. It is not inflated by a single viral moment, but it has been earned through a pattern of authentic, volcanic fan engagement that never switches off between tournaments. To understand the true depth of this gravity, you have to look back to November 2024, when the legendary Rafael Nadal officially retired from professional tennis, leaving behind a legacy of 14 Roland Garros titles and the most decorated clay court career in the history of civilization. His retirement felt like the definitive end of an era, but months later, when Nadal stepped back onto a tennis court for the very first time since his retirement for his first competitive practice hit, his choice of partner shocked the industry. He stepped onto the clay at his own elite academy in Manacor, Mallorca, and he did not choose a top 10 player or a reigning Grand Slam champion for his highly anticipated reintroduction to the sport. He specifically chose Alex Eala, the 20-year-old from the Philippines who trains at his facility. Eala later described the surreal experience in an exclusive interview with The National, stating it was completely crazy, that it was her first time ever hitting with him, and she was so incredibly nervous because it was definitely physically demanding, noting that even though he had been off the court for a year and she had been training strongly, his intensity made her feel so far away, but it was just an unforgettable opportunity to absorb his immense knowledge, concluding that just to say you hit with Rafa is completely insane, and she feels so incredibly lucky and blessed. 14 Roland Garros titles, and he made one single choice for his first official practice back. There is no press conference statement, no podcast endorsement, and no multi-million-dollar promotional campaign that could ever carry the immense weight of that single quiet decision. Nadal communicates almost exclusively through his actions, and his actions on that court said absolutely everything. Now, she arrives at his absolute cathedral, Roland Garros, the very red clay that bore the foundational imprint of his entire career, entering the draw as a heavily seeded player with a secondary market pricing her opening sessions at eye-watering four-figure sums. The King of Clay certainly did not come back from his retirement to hit hitting lines with just anyone. What is unfolding in Paris right now is absolutely not a localized sports story. It is the visible leading edge of a massive structural shift that the WTA has not yet formally addressed, and that professional tennis cannot afford to ignore much longer. Southeast Asia, a region boasting over 700 million people, rapidly growing middle classes, and a documented hunger for sports identity, has historically been treated as a mere peripheral market by the traditional power brokers of professional tennis. The sport's commercial architecture was built almost entirely around Europe and North America, but Eala's commanding presence at Roland Garros 2026 alongside the rise of Janice Chen of Indonesia, who became the first Indonesian woman to break into the global top 50 since Yayuk Basuki back in 1998, represents the definitive arrival of that massive market at the sport's most prestigious address. The fans are no longer coming from the peripheral boundaries, they are actively crashing the central servers. The popularity premium question that the New York Times initially raised back in January has officially become a pressing Paris question. Should court assignments at Grand Slams strictly reflect a player's massive commercial gravity alongside their numerical ranking? The ticket market has already cast its definitive vote as $2,000 for VIP seats during Eala's opening sessions is a loud market-generated answer.
I'm finding my footing and I know that I can do well. I'm a much better player physically, mentally than I was last year.
The WTA and Roland Garros have remained publicly silent on the matter, but that institutional silence will not be able to hold much longer because the matchup calendar directly ahead makes this specific moment even more significant. If Eala manages to defeat Jovic on Sunday, she enters a dangerous section of the draw that includes number 1 seed Aryna Sabalenka, and in that exact same quarter, Coco Gauff, the defending Roland Garros champion. A potential Eala versus Gauff quarterfinal match between the reigning French Open title holder and the player who is single-handedly redefining what a tennis fan base looks like in 2026 would easily be the most commercially explosive, viral women's quarterfinal Roland Garros has staged in decades. You need to watch the upcoming Wimbledon and United States Open draws, with that exact matchup potential kept firmly in mind because the stakes are building well beyond this opening round. Just 3 days before her Roland Garros first-round match, Eala suffered a tough loss in Strasbourg to an unseeded opponent, Oleksandra Olenikova, a gritty Ukrainian qualifier who took her down in 3 intense sets. This is the grueling part of the professional tour that never makes the glossy television highlights. A quiet, frustrating clay court defeat in a minor tune-up tournament, just 3 days before the biggest clay event on the global calendar. In Rome, just a week prior to that, she had brilliantly defeated Olympic silver medalist Wang Xinyu 6-4, 6-3 before running into a tough loss against former French Open champion Elena Rybakina in the subsequent round. From Rome, she went straight to Strasbourg, lost to a qualifier, and then immediately traveled to Roland Garros, stepping onto court 4 on May 22nd, the very morning after arriving, to hit ground strokes in front of a packed crowd that had literally traveled from another continent just to watch her warm up. There was no dramatic excuse or statement posted on her social media accounts regarding the Strasbourg setback. There was only the quiet work, racket in hand, red clay under her feet, and the beautiful noise of people who flew across the globe to Paris specifically because she was going to be on that court. "I am finding my footing and I know that I can do well," she quietly stated in her pre-tournament comments published on the official Roland Garros website, adding that she is a much better player physically and mentally than she was last year, and her team has been working incredibly hard, so she hopes the things they have practiced will reflect deeply on her game. That is exactly what true accountability sounds like, at 20 years old, devoid of weak excuses or PR deflection, showing only the quiet certainty of a professional who knows the work is far from finished, and proudly shows up the next morning anyway, in front of a crowd that literally crashed a website just to be there. 500,000 people crashed the servers before the draw was even announced. VIP seats hit $2,000 on the secondary markets. A top 10 superstar voluntarily sat in the stands just to absorb her match's energy, and the greatest clay court player in human history chose her as his definitive comeback partner. At the absolute center of all this global madness, the young prodigy quietly admitted she was initially a little bit in denial about the scale of it all, but the sporting world is absolutely not in denial. What is happening at Roland Garros 2026 is something the traditional infrastructure of the sport was never designed to contain. Alex Eala has not just entered the French Open as a historically seeded competitor, she has officially arrived as the most culturally consequential presence at this entire tournament, regardless of her seed number, regardless of her ranking, and regardless of what a past first-round record might say. The crashed servers, the flooded practice courts, and the four-figure ticket resale prices are not future predictions, they are binding receipts, and they were fully generated before she even hit a single competitive ball in official competition this fortnight. Retrospective inevitability demands one honest admission from every tennis analyst, which is that the signs of this explosion were always right there in front of us. Every single packed practice court, every overflowing gallery, and every tournament director quietly recalculating stadium capacity pointed to this exact moment as the ultimate destination, and Paris has simply made it impossible for the world to look away. Here is the big question worth debating right now, because if Eala reaches the quarterfinals and sets up a titanic clash against Coco Gauff on Philippe Chatrier, should Roland Garros be structurally obligated to place that match on the main court regardless of traditional seating protocols? And would you personally pay $2,000 to be inside that stadium if they did? Drop your raw answers below, because that massive conversation starts right now, and the next few rounds are going to force this entire sport to decide its future direction. If you want to be in the conversation long before the elite institution finally catches up and figures out exactly what an explosive asset it has on its hands, you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. We are covering every single Eala match, every controversial court assignment decision, and every ticket market movement throughout this entire historic fortnight, because this story is nowhere near finished writing itself.